Roll Tide and welcome to this Thursday edition of Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR. This is Roger Hoover. Great to be with you from our studios in Tuscaloosa as we get set for this week's show, taking a look, of course, at baseball, football, and a little bit of softball. We'll go through everything coming up on the show today thanks to our smart board that's been given to us by our friends at RJ Young. RJ Young is the official technology solutions provider of Crimson Drive, and they'll help us go through everything coming up on the show, plus our headlines for today. We'll start by talking with Andrew Pinckney, outstanding outfielder for the Crimson Tide baseball team that's really been on a home run tear. He had homered in 5 straight SEC games going back to the Missouri series and the first 2 games against LSU. He'll join us to talk about that. Then we'll be talking some Crimson Tide football with Nick Kelly of the Tuscaloosa News. He had a very unique opportunity to be a media coach during the Golden Flake A-Day game on April 22nd. He'll run us through all of that, plus his thoughts on spring practice for the Crimson Tide. Then we'll close out the show by talking about Crimson Tide softball as Alabama will close the regular season coming up this weekend in Oxford, Mississippi against the Ole Miss Rebels. We'll have our broadcasters Tom Canterbury, Gray Robertson give us their thoughts on the Crimson Tide at this point of the season. Go through the rest of the headlines on our show, again thanks to the smart board, and we will start with Alabama baseball. The Crimson Tide will be back in action this weekend after last weekend going 0-3 against the LSU Tigers at Alex Box Stadium. Now again, this weekend home against Vanderbilt, and I didn't put the ranking on the screen, but they are ranked number 5 in the nation. So a huge series coming up against Vandy. Make sure you check out rolltide.com for promotions, and plus we will have our conversation with Andrew Pinckney coming up in just a few moments. And then we also learned this morning from Director of Athletics Greg Byrne for the University of Alabama that Alabama has initiated the termination process for head coach Brad Bohannon, so he will no longer be the head coach of the Crimson Tide. We will see Jason Jackson, the pitching coach, be the interim head coach starting tonight against Vanderbilt. Looking now to Alabama softball. The Crimson Tide, again, 2-1 this past week against LSU. Solid wins on Friday and Sunday. Good to see that in the final home weekend of the regular season. No surprise, Montana Fout's SEC co-pitcher of the week as she continues earning that award at a record pace. Now this weekend, the Crimson Tide will be at Ole Miss. It's the final weekend of the regular season. That means next week we'll be talking about the SEC tournament for the Crimson Tide. That's coming up in Fayetteville, Arkansas, at the home of the Razorbacks. So we look forward to talking tournament next week. Academics, very strong APR really across the board in all sports. A great semester in the classroom, great year overall for all of Alabama in academics, so we certainly love to see that. Women's golf team will be down in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, starting on Monday to begin the NCAA regional. We just heard the men's team was selected to a regional as well, so we'll be talking some golf coming up next week on the show. If you missed where any Alabama football players were drafted or signed a free agent contract, you can find all that at rolledtide.com. Really cool. Thursday night, seeing Bryce Young be picked number 1 overall. 2 picks later, Will Anderson Jr. selected by the Houston Texans after Bryce went to the Carolina Panthers. And then how about Jahmyr Gibbs, also a first-rounder as well, running back going to the Detroit Lions. Then the rowing team finished up as well as the Lake Wheeler Invitational, part of some really strong performances from Glenn Putre's squad all throughout the year. But we will start our show today talking about baseball and talking with one of the best for the Alabama Crimson Tide, and Andrew Pinckney, as he gives his thoughts on this season for Alabama. Pink, Roll Tide, how are you enjoying this season?
I'm doing good. Season's going great. Roll Tide.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you with us as the Crimson Tide fans have been used to celebrating some big home runs for you in the last few weeks. What's led to this good stretch of the plate for you?
Yeah, I think it's just been, staying relaxed at the plate and not trying to do too much, and, just taking the results as they come and just letting things happen.
Certainly has been good to see for you and the Crimson Tide. How much fun is this team having right now?
I mean, it's a lot of fun. I mean, even when we don't win the game, it's it's always a close game, and it's, everybody scoring and having fun. It's just a good energy, good loose, relaxed, and just out there having fun. So.
Yeah, you mentioned even if the team doesn't win, you look back to the LSU series, all of those games were close. The first game against Auburn, you're down 8-0 going to the bottom of the ninth and eventually rally to get the tying run to the plate. Just how resilient is this team when their backs are up against the wall?
I think extremely resilient. I mean, I think it also just comes down to we have really good hitters in the lineup, and, it's really hard to get us out 27 times. And so at some point during the game, we're going to go on a stretch where we put a lot of at-bats together and string a lot of hits together, and that helps us keep any game close or extend our lead or whatever we might need. So
Well, everyone last year really started to take notice of your game, specifically at the plate and then defensively with getting a lot of outfield assists. What was your mindset coming into the start of the season? Did you have any personal goals or anything different coming into this year?
Everybody wants to play good, and I wanted to hit a lot of home runs and hit for average, but I think kind of putting those expectations on myself kind of slowed me down a little bit at the beginning. Um, and I think starting like the last few weeks, it's just been like forget the expectations, forget the results, just go out there and play. And I think that's kind of helped me get some better results, lately. So.
It's part of that swinging for power, thinking about not just hitting the ball far, but are you really thinking about just hitting it hard every time you come to the plate?
Yeah, that's definitely the goal every time to hit the ball hard and as hard as you can. And sometimes that can be a blessing and a curse. You want to be aggressive at the plate and try and do damage, but you also don't want to, get too big and try and do too much. So it's definitely trying to find that fine line between being aggressive and really, outdoing your swing, so to speak.
And then defensively, we've seen you both in right field and then some with Caden Rose injured in center field as well. Have you been happy with your play in the outfield so far this year?
Yeah, I haven't really had as many opportunities to throw people out this year. I think people are a little more cautious now, but it's been fine. I've been making my plays and trying to help the team win. So.
You absolutely have, and including against LSU, you even went into the stands to try and make a catch over this past weekend in Baton Rouge. What can you tell our fans about that play as you came this close, it looked like, to having one of the best catches we've seen in college baseball?
It was weird. The wind was howling all weekend, and the ball went up, and I thought it was just going to be like a play in foul territory, and just kept going and kept going. And I mean, I really wanted to catch the ball, so I just leaned over, and I ended up falling into a few old ladies and her kids, and they helped me up, and it was fine, and I was unharmed, thankfully. But I was kind of afraid of getting some ketchup and mustard on my pants or whatever. But yeah, it was fine. I'm glad I wasn't hurt or got a concussion or anything. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned playing on the road at LSU. Over the last couple of years, you've gotten to go to some of the best college baseball environments there are. And in the outfield, sometimes a lot of in front of a lot of students, you can hear a lot of things who have been some of the funnier fan bases or the more intense fan bases you've dealt with on the road.
Gosh, I think probably the most funny was Mississippi State. I don't really know. They just had some good things to say. They weren't overly mean, but they were making fun of me, and I could laugh about it. So they're definitely a good fan base to play in front of.
And then how about at the Joe? What's the relationship like between Alabama's right fielder and the student section, the right field Rangers just beyond the wall?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of weird, at least with me. I acknowledge them, and I say hi, and sometimes they'll ask me like what I'm doing tonight, and it's usually nothing. But I don't know. They're just pretty chill. They're just kind of out there having a few drinks and watching the game, and they don't really get too rowdy. So it is what it is.
Well, people do get rowdy in the Crimson Tide dugout every time a home run is hit. What did you first think when you saw the disco helmet, and how much have you enjoyed that celebration plus the Polaroid pictures?
So the disco helmet has just been I don't even know what to think about it. The year started and we didn't have anything, but we all knew we wanted something. So Jim was just like, "Hey, I found this helmet online on Amazon. It looks pretty cool." So we all pitched in some money, and I thought it was just going to be like some rinky-dink thing. We use it for like a week, and it's just kind of fizzles out. And now it's just like our thing. It's just this giant helmet. First time I saw it, I was just like, "No way, I'm putting this on my head." But I don't know. It's pretty cool, and I like taking the pictures. So I don't know.
Well, you've been putting it on your head a lot with all the home runs lately. That's certainly been good to see for you. And then somebody else that's hitting a lot of home runs is Colby Shelton, who leads the way right now with 16, setting the freshman record at Alabama. Just how impressed are you with the way he's been able to transition to the college game?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody could have expected him to blow up like this, but it's definitely we definitely knew he was gonna have success. He is like really mature kid and kind of goes about his business the right way and is always working hard, working on his swing. And it's no surprise that he's having success, but this amount of success is really good to see, and it'll be exciting to see what he does, his sophomore, his junior year. So.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing what's ahead for this baseball team. Still have 3 weeks left to go in the regular season, then the SEC tournament and regionals after that. Just what do you feel like this team is capable of down the stretch?
I think the sky's the limit for us for sure. We've had a lot of close games, and especially like getting the pitching figured out and having some injuries here, and we're starting to put it together. And as long as the bats keep going and we can find some more depth on the mound, we'll have a deep run in the playoffs and see what we can do.
Well, we look forward to all of it. Andrew Pinckney, just thank you so much for your time joining us this week on Crimson Drive. Best of luck against Vanderbilt this weekend. Roll Tide.
Absolutely. Roll Tide.
Really great conversation with Andrew Pinckney. Hope he plays well coming up this weekend for Alabama hosting Vanderbilt again. Games on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 7 p.m. the next 2 nights, and then Saturday the series will wrap up at 2 p.m. at the Joe. Well, it's been just almost 2 weeks since we played the Golden Flake 8-day game at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and Nick Kelly, of course, of the Tuscaloosa News, we've had him on the show a lot, talking about Alabama football, but usually he's in the press box covering the ball game with the T-News just in a normal capacity, but with the spring game, a chance for him to be a media coach, so that was really entertaining to get his thoughts on, plus everything we learned about this Crimson Tide football team throughout the last few months getting ready in spring practice. Here's our conversation with Nick Kelly from the Tuscaloosa News. Last week, he was wearing a shirt kind of like this during A-Day, as he got to be one of the guest coaches for the Golden Flake A-Day game. And Nick, thank you so much for joining us. How was your experience at Bryant-Denny Stadium on April 22nd?
It was something. Great to be with you. My fiance Elizabeth said I looked like I was in a Halloween costume wearing Crimson Tide gear. So that was a weird experience, but it was great to get a kind of front row seat to the team and seeing how it all works and getting behind the sideline, the locker room. It was a really informative experience. And just frankly, I love football. I love being close to the action. So it was cool to be that up close. And normally I'm up in the press box and not getting that close of a look. And it was really informative and insightful to see kind of how the team works and how they put things together and how it all comes together on game day.
So you're one of the media coaches for the game. If you could just kind of take us through the entire experience, starting with when you got offered the opportunity and then which team were you with, and just take us through the day with those guys.
Yeah, it was basically got there around 11 and got to kind of walk around the field a little bit during that alumni flag football game. And then the team got there, I think around 12:50 or so. And essentially once they got there, they, of course, Walk of Champions, they flood into the locker room, those doors open and they walk in and they fill up the locker. Normally, it was a more condensed than normal because it's just not exactly a normal game, but because they were already dressed, came in full pads. It's a little bit different experience that way, but once they got in the locker room, Chloe McKinstry was breaking them down, kind of getting them hyped up. They're circled around him, and then they all knelt and said the Lord's Prayer. And then Nick Saban walked in and dressed the team, and they kind of broke off and began warm-ups, and off they went. Essentially, it was one of those things where, again, just a little bit different, where the whole team did warm-ups together. But of course, once that warm-up portion ended, you had the one team go to the one locker room, the other team go to the other locker room. And I was part of the white team. So I was in the home locker room. So that was with Tommy Reese and Kevin Steele, the both new coordinators. And essentially, once they get back in the locker room before the game, you have the offense on one side, defense on the other, and they kind of are just barking out orders of like, hey, this is what we want. This is what we're looking for. Tommy Reese was saying control the line of scrimmage, how, we will do that. That's what he said. And so it's really rapid fire. Like they're almost, and I mean, they're not shouting over each other, but they're making sure, there's no doubt you're gonna be able to hear them, is the player perspective on that. And so they're kind of circled up. They had like an old school projector. I felt like I was back in like middle school or something, where they have that kind of overhead, just on the wall. They had some things. And so using that a little bit. And so then they break it down. They meet as in position groups. And then they come together as a team in the middle of the locker room. Kevin Steele addressed them as before they went out on the field. And then off they go and wait in the tunnel. We jog on and get to the sideline and get kind of warm-ups rolling. And next thing you know, the game's starting. So that's kind of the pregame experience, at least. And then, during the game, you essentially get, it's what it looks like from afar, but got to be up close for that. And man, that Gatorade, I tried some of that. It is saturated. That's some saturated Gatorade. I mean, that, of course, they're losing a lot of electrolytes and sweat and just all that kind of stuff. So it's important that they have, I don't know what's in it, probably some decent amount of sugar because they need that. So that stuff is not your usual Gatorade, so to speak. So yeah, they keep that well stocked, water, all those types of things, and really it's fascinating seeing how each coach interacts with their players. The moment can dictate that, but overall it can just be something where this coach has this style, this coach has that style. So it's kind of fascinating getting to see up close and personal. And of course, there's plenty of colorful language on any sideline or any sporting event. You go in a dugout, you go on a basketball bench. I mean, you're you're going to get more colorful language than at any level of football or any level of sports. But so it was just really neat to be part of like the energy that comes with being on the sideline, because there's a great play. You have a guy walking down the sideline who's getting high fives, and teammates saying good stuff kind of thing and shaking hands. And so there's a lot of reassurance that way and just affirmation. And of course, when things don't go well, players are frustrated, coaches are frustrated. So it's really there's an emotional ride you go on when you're on the sideline. And really being up close and personal for that was fascinating.
And you got to be around Tommy Rees, who is the new offensive coordinator. Kind of what'd you pick up on and what his style could be like and how he interacted with the players?
Yeah, very hands-on, very, you can tell he's got good rapport with them. He's a communicator. He's constantly talking. He's constantly getting feedback. He's telling them, hey, look for this. He wants to know what they saw. So he was constantly talking with them. And the other thing too is, he's just, he's not that old. He's 30. And so he's not that much older than the players. And I think that helps in some ways. Like I didn't notice him being a yeller. Some coaches are more yellers, some more gruff that way. Maybe it's because of his age, and he was loud when he needed to be. It's not that he didn't raise his voice; it's just he didn't seem like the type that his first reaction is to chew you out, so to speak. He's more of a, hey, what happened there? Walk me through what happened. Explain to me what happened there. What did you see? It's really, of course, frustration when it doesn't work well. They had turnovers, so it's not like he doesn't get frustrated, but I think he's really just trying to figure out why it went wrong and immediately diagnose that, and so they can fix it moving forward. So really, I think just smart approach, cerebral approach, and just really seems like a good rapport that he has with his players.
And then how about the role of Coach Saban in a game like this, where he's obviously in the blazer, he's on the field as opposed to being on the sidelines? So what'd you like about getting to see him as he took everything in during A-Day?
Yeah, so he was pretty far away from, me, because I was on the sideline. He was, like you said, middle of the field. But there were moments where if he wanted a guy to hear a message, I think like at one point he walked off talking a little bit with Eli Holsting, kind of instructing him on some things, just communicating a little bit with him. There's also a moment late in the game where he was not thrilled with the offense for the white team had been doing. So he came over to the sideline to express that. And lo and behold, they go and score a touchdown on that next drive before the end of the game. So I think Coach Saban can be quite the motivator, and people can get pretty locked in when he expresses how he feels about a certain performance. So he's very involved, but obviously he's kind of more in that CEO role for that game, just because he is not on one team or the other. But when he wants to get a point across, he'll get that point across.
So the Crimson beat the White in the Golden Flake A-Day game, and that means the Crimson team got the Tomahawk Steaks on Monday night, and then the losing team, the White team, got the Franks and Beanie Weenies, as we always like to say down here in Alabama. Or were you able to go to that Monday night dinner at Malmore?
I did. And I, of course, as a member of the losing team, a coach on the losing team who's now 0-1 as a college football coach, I too had the Franks and Beans and actually, so very intentionally, the display of them is not appealing. Like you have them in tin cans, whereas on the other side of the aisle, you have them eating, great steaks. You have dessert. You have nice cups. We had plastic cups, and we had like Gatorade coolers we were getting our water from. So that was a little different from what the winning team had. But I'm not gonna lie. As far as I just try not to think about the steak, but as far as like hot dogs and baked beans go, like it was pretty good. And frankly, anything we had there, even though it was not as good as a steak, it's still probably better than what I was going to be making myself for dinner. So I took it nonetheless. So it wasn't as bad, but you just couldn't look on the other side, because if you did, then you'd be sad that you're just eating hot dogs and beans.
That's pretty funny. I think last year we had Katie Wyndham on around this time of the year. She was part of the winning team. So now we've had the steak winner, and now we've had the Franks and Beans, courtesy of you, Nick. So that's we've got it even out here on Crimson Drive.
Glad to take one for the team and provide that perspective. I would have loved a steak, but alas, that was not in my future.
Absolutely. So, great way for a day to wrap up spring football for the Crimson Tide. And even last week, a little bit of news concerning the quarterbacks as Tyler Buckner transfers in from Notre Dame after taking a quick visit to Tuscaloosa. Just where do things stand in the quarterback competition at this point as we talk in early May?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think the question we're going to be continuing to ask throughout the offseason, because again, there are things to like about Jalen Milroe. There are things to like about Ty Simpson, but there are also things that Coach Saban has expressed he hasn't liked, and I think we saw that in A-Day in terms of the inconsistency. And that's the biggest thing, is when you have that inconsistency, you almost it just gives you pause as a coach, because you don't know what to expect at times, or trust is a big thing, and I think that's really important in that position. But adding Tyler Buckner, to me, it adds another guy to the competition. Does not necessarily mean he is the guy, because if you look at he's a little bit more experienced. He's had multiple starts, not a ton, but he's had a couple starts. Whereas Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson have combined for one start. So he has a little bit more experience. Him and Tommy are close. So that plays a role as well. But he's also a guy who I think last year had 3 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And so he's not necessarily a guy coming in who screams, yeah, this guy is super secure with the football and doesn't make mistakes. Now, he has had more experience, so maybe he has learned how to not make those mistakes. And so if that he ends up starting, that could be why. But it's not a guy like, yes, they got their starting quarterback, like that is who it's going to be. But I mean, he very well could start. Tyler Buckner could, but I think he's a guy in the competition who's got a shot to win it. But I think it's too early to tell who ultimately is going to be under center for that first snap in September.
So still some questions there, but on other spots on this Crimson Tide roster, do you feel like we learned a lot about this football team during the past few weeks?
I think so. I mean, in some ways, it's of course, okay, who are some of the newcomers, that are looking good? And I think that we had heard plenty of buzz about Justice Haynes at running back, the freshman from Georgia coming into the A-Day game. He, of course, met that with multiple touchdowns. And so, I mean, he's a guy that, I think in terms of true answers, I think there's a lot of depth at certain positions, running back, receiver, you got a lot of options. Offensive line, I think as a group, I think it's encouraging. Now, of course, they had the sacks in the A-Day game that they gave up. Elijah Pritchett had some struggles. But I think, the design of that, the A-Day game it can be a little tricky to exactly tell, okay, yes, this offensive line is going to be great or it's not, because it's two-hand touch of the quarterback. It's you're not necessarily bringing out the full playbook to help some of those guys. So I think it might be too early to tell in terms of, okay, this offensive line is going to be great or not. But I think we're leaning toward this offensive line being maybe really good to help the run. And I think it's still going to be the case as long as you have J.C. Latham and Tyler Booker on one side together. I mean, they could do some serious damage in the run game blocking. So I'm kind of rambling here, but in terms of I think we got some more answers. We still have some more questions. I mean, the secondary is another answer. I think that's going to be a legit secondary. Of course, it's supposed to both positive and negative when they're making plays, intercepting passes, things like that, because that reflects poorly on the offense. But defensively, I mean, the guys you got at corner with Kool-Aid and Terrion and Earl Little, that interception he had was impressive. So I mean, there's Malachi Moore looked good. I mean, you got Caleb Downs, the freshman, looking good. Christian Story. I mean, there are a lot of options there, and I think a lot of reasons to be optimistic about that position group. And so, even though a lot of people were talking about the quarterbacks and the reason to be concerned a little bit there, look at that in a positive way. The secondary looked really good at times. So I think that still some kinks to be worked out, but overall, that secondary for the defense could end up being the best position on the team potentially.
Well, you went right from A-Day to Kansas City for the NFL draft. Of course, it was a great Thursday night for the Crimson Tide. Great draft overall for Alabama. Just what was that experience like seeing Bryce Young be selected number 1, and just a couple picks later, Will Anderson Jr.?
Yeah, it was, a great day if you're an Alabama fan, because Alabama kept having, the brand pop up, so to speak, in the first few picks. And I think it was a great advertisement for the program. Nick Saban was there, sporting the pink sport coat. It was, it kind of played out how we expected to an extent. Bryce was ever projected to be the first overall pick. That happened. I think the Panthers fans are excited to get him. And I think in a lot of ways, it just felt like this makes sense. It's a culmination of a guy who had a fantastic career at Alabama, a guy who has always shined in just about every moment, and just a great ambassador for whatever brand or program that you want to have him represent. I think it just made sense. Like, it felt a lot like I was at the Heisman ceremony too when he won it. It felt a lot like that, where similar demeanor from him. It just makes sense for him to go, to win the Heisman, for him to be the first overall pick. So I think that, it just felt like this is, and of course, hopefully a long career ahead for him, but overall, it just felt like, this is the culmination of all his hard work at Alabama. And he went first overall, giving Nick Saban that first overall pick during his time at Alabama. And Will going 2 picks later, I think was a pretty cool moment for those two, because they're super close. Those two are good friends and leaders together on this, past couple of years of Alabama football. And so for them, that to happen for them, you could just tell how excited they were. And then Jahmyr Gibbs, a little bit of a surprise at 12. Obviously a really talented back, but less so even just Jahmyr Gibbs and more so just the position at running back, how the NFL just didn't draft it that high anymore. I think a lot of folks weren't expecting him to go at 12, but he did. And I think at the end of the day, if he's a good pick and it works out, then you're not going to care if he got picked at 12 or 24. Of course, now, all the people who say, you got bad value for him because he's running back, there's that argument to be made. But if it works out and he's a talented weapon for them, I think they won't care if they drafted him at 12 instead of 24.
Certainly was a great night for Alabama in the NFL draft. As we start to wrap up football conversation, still a lot of baseball and softball ahead, of course, for the Crimson Tide, and then a little bit of summer break. And then, Nick, before you know it, it's going to be time for football coming up with fall camp, media days, all that good stuff. But we look forward to reading your coverage in the Tuscaloosa News. Just thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Roger. Always good to see you and good to be with you.
Appreciate Nick Kelly joining us earlier in the week to give us his thoughts on Alabama football and his experience as a guest coach for the Golden Flake A-Day game. We transition now to softball, and the Crimson Tide had a winning weekend this past weekend in Tuscaloosa against the LSU Tigers. Now looking ahead to this weekend's series against the Ole Miss Rebels. And to give us a scouting report and just an overall report on where things stand right now for Alabama, we turn things over on Crimson Drive to our softball broadcasters, Tom Canterbury, Gray Robertson. They have all the details on Crimson Tide softball. Just 1 week left in the regular season.
Thank you so much, Roger. Tom Canterbury alongside Gray Robertson virtually as we're getting you set for this weekend, the regular season finale, the series at Ole Miss for Alabama softball. The Crimson Tide coming off of a series victory at home over LSU. And Gray, the Tide won that one 2-1. The 2 games that the Crimson Tide won, 2 shutout victories for Montana Fouts. And when we're looking at bracketology and everything, we think the Crimson Tide has wrapped up a host regional situation, but it was the final regular season series at home for the seniors and Montana Fouts in particular.
So many ways that we could take this, but we have to start with Tana and what she was able to do in the circle. 2 complete game shutouts to make her total now 7 complete game shutouts in SEC play this year. By comparison, the next 2 pitchers that we think that, are other contenders for SEC Pitcher of the Year, Ashley Rogers at Tennessee and Maddie Pinta at Auburn, they have 7 combined. So that just puts in perspective what Fouts is doing right now, and just her ability to use every tool that she has been so impressive to keep hitters off balance, to mix speeds, 65 to 70, throw in a little off speed here and there, work her runner, work her curve, work her rise, work her drop, and when it's not working, use everything else, has just been beyond impressive. And I think she is pitching right now the best she has in her entire career. And what a weekend to send off the people with their final year of eligibility. Fouts, Prangy, Shipman, Hensley, really awesome that we got to celebrate such an incredible group of young women. And Ashley Prangy was the one who had the big at-bats in the Sunday win to secure the series. So really it all just comes together for those seniors, Tom.
And it was great to be able to do it against a team like LSU who was playing well entering that last weekend and then, has a really good offense. They were they're fighting for not only a regional host, but maybe a super regional host as well. And to be able to shut out that offense twice, really, really impressive.
I mean, I read the stats many times on the air. LSU is top 3 in most offensive categories overall. Conference play, a little bit of a dip, but not that much, and not to where you would think most pitchers would be able to do what Montana Fouts did, but Montana Fouts is not like most pitchers. And you're exactly right. There were a lot of postseason things at play this weekend. Obviously, SEC standings, I'm sure we'll dig into in just a bit. But when it comes to the NCAA tournament, this was an LSU team that I had in as a potential Super host, and now I have out. And Alabama had a hand in that. Whereas for the Crimson Tide, they were safely in as a regional host. And now with RPI chaos raining down on everybody in college softball, winning this series has given them, albeit still a small chance to maybe sneak in as a top 8 with a strong finish to the year because the metrics love the Tide so much. So Alabama certainly helped their case in the postseason. Of course, there are 2 things we have to clarify, Tom. Alabama will make the NCAA tournament, and they will host a regional almost definitely, especially after the play we saw this weekend.
Yeah, and Alabama now will travel to Ole Miss to wrap up the regular season. Alabama not going to be able to win the overall regular season championship in the SEC, mathematically eliminated, but still a lot to play for the Crimson Tide here this weekend.
Yeah, you're still looking for one of those top 4. I guess officially it's a double bye in the SEC tournament since you've got the 12-13 game in the first round. But it's just to make sure that you don't have to play on that massive Thursday. And you're going to need some help. A full game behind Auburn and Arkansas, who both have a tiebreaker over you. The Hogs have to go to Missouri this weekend. Auburn has a little bit of an easier series, I would say, at home. And again, you're going to need some help, but if you take care of business, then you're going to give yourself a shot. And I think at this point it would take a sweep probably to sneak in one of those spots, the 3 or the 4. But I think almost just as importantly, if you don't get that double bye, then you've got to make sure that you're the 5 seed, because then your first game would be the 12-13. And while you might say, do we want that? We want to be able to prepare. I think from what we've seen out of the teams that are in contention for that spot, it would be a good matchup for anybody in the circle, not just Montana Fouts. And I think that would give you still a solid path forward once we get to Fayetteville in the SEC tournament.
Right. And then, as you mentioned, you have Fayetteville, the SEC tournament coming up next week after the matchup with Ole Miss this weekend. But not only playing for what you're looking at SEC-wise, but like you said, if Alabama was to go on a run here, if the Tide was to, say, get the sweep against Ole Miss and then make a run to semifinal finals of the SEC tournament, maybe win the whole thing, that would certainly help out the resume for a chance at that top 8 seed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got just so much movement happening around the country with the RPI bumping up teams that don't have very strong resumes in my eyes, and in many other people who bracket for fun or for a living on the softball side's eyes. And Alabama is one of those teams that the metrics love. Number 1 strength of schedule. I believe number 11 non-con SOS. I'm not looking at it right now, but I charted this all day, so I feel like I've remembered it. And there are teams just ahead, like Arkansas, like Georgia, like LSU, like Texas, who have some holes in the resume. And so if those teams don't win, if they lose, if they falter at all at the tail end of the regular season and in conference tournaments, a strong weekend against Ole Miss, probably a sweep is needed, and then a good run in the SEC tournament could help Alabama kind of backdoor into maybe that 8 spot. 7 might be a touch high, but I think 8 is at least somewhat on the table at this point.
And it will take, as I mentioned, probably a sweep against Ole Miss to get that ball rolling for that possibility. It is a possibility to get the sweep against Ole Miss, but what will the Tide need to do? What are going to be some of the keys against an Ole Miss team that has had a good pitching staff, somewhat questionable offense?
Yeah, this is an Ole Miss team that's really interesting because it seems like the offense does the bulk of its work in games where the pitching staff doesn't have it, and vice versa. When the pitching staff looks great and looks lights out, the offense can't do anything. So it's going to be really interesting to see which Rebels team we see this weekend when we journey over to Oxford. But a good pitching staff. McKenna Clee-Thermos, the Oregon transfer, has been somebody that has been a little bit unreliable in the big moments, but we know she has the talent because she showed us that at Oregon. Caitlin Riley, for a long time this year, was in the top half in overall and conference play ERA. Both have dropped a bit of late, but she certainly has the potential to shut down any offense that she faces. And then the Rebels have one of the best leadoff hitters in the conference in Tate Whitley, a player that we were stunned was left off the preseason All-SEC team this year. That was probably my biggest surprise, to not see Tate Whitley honored before this year. And she's somebody who's been getting on base just so consistently of late, and especially in conference play after kind of a slower start. So Alabama's got to do a couple things. They've got to make sure that they get the timely hit. I know that sounds crazy to keep saying it, but it's still important. It's always important. And to also find a way to parlay that with just a greater number of hits, because against LSU, we saw Alabama get the timely hits, but not get many cumulative base hits in that series. And then I think it's all about the defense behind the pitching, especially in the game. I assume there will be a game where Montana Fouts is not pitching. If you make mistakes, Ole Miss is a team similar to LSU that uses speed and gap-to-gap power more than home run power. So they're, I think, a team that can help out when it comes to the Avalanche. They can help push the snowball down because they do such a great job on the base paths and stringing at-bats together and stringing hits together. So if you make a mistake, you cannot let it lead to even more miscues later on in the inning.
Well, we got Alabama softball at Ole Miss on the Crimson Tide Sports Network coming up this weekend. We'll be there all three games, 6 o'clock on Friday, the 5:50 airtime on the network, 1 o'clock on both Saturday and Sunday, 12:50 the airtime on the Crimson Tide Sports Network. If you're listening in Tuscaloosa over the air, you can listen on 97.5 FM, nick975.com, the MeTV 975 app, as well as the Varsity app for all that coverage. So a lot of different ways you can hear us, and we'll be there, and hopefully it'll be a lot of fun as we wrap up already the 2023 season. It's amazing how quickly it can flow by.
Tom, I think my laptop is lying to me right now. It seems to say it is May 2nd, and that doesn't make any sense because we were just in Clearwater.
Yes, it flies by. Selection Sunday is just a couple of weeks away, and it'll be tournament time, which is one of the most fun times in all of sports, and definitely in college softball.
Yeah, so if you're a softball fan, get to the TV, watch Alabama, listen to us on the Crimson Tide Sports Network, but most importantly, keep watching everything. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma will be on ESPN on Saturday right after our game, so it's just a perfect little segue into Bedlam, and let's see how big this sport can get, because the viewership, the attendance, they've all reached record numbers this year. Let's see what more we can do here in May, Tom, because like you said, this is the fun part of a season for everybody that loves this sport.
Yeah, so again, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 5:50 on Friday, 12:50 on both Saturday and Sunday. Alabama wrapping up the 2023 season at Ole Miss. For Gray Robertson, I'm Tom Canterbury. Back to you, Roger.
Thanks to Tom and Gray for joining us. Of course, they'll have us covered for Alabama softball this weekend against Ole Miss. That's coming up in Oxford. Here in Tuscaloosa, we have baseball against Vanderbilt. It's time to take a look at what's coming up this weekend on the Crimson Tide Sports Network. It is time for the Wickles Weekend Update, brought to you, of course, by Wickles Pickles. They are wickedly delicious. We have the pickle chips, the relish here with us on set at all times. For more, you can go online to wicklespickles.com. Let's take a look at what's coming up across the Crimson Tide Sports Network this weekend. Well, starting tonight, it's Alabama baseball home against the Vanderbilt Commodores. 7 o'clock will be the first pitch time, so our airtime the next two nights here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network will be 6:55 for the broadcast coming up between the Crimson Tide and the Commodores. Then that series will wrap up on Saturday at 2 p.m. Softball team, as we mentioned with Tom and Gray, getting started tomorrow night, and then day baseball coming up on Saturday and Sunday at 1 p.m. And then next week, we will be back for another edition of Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR at 2 p.m. on Thursdays. We're going to have this show, even though we've kind of wrapped up Tide TV this week. And hey, coach, for the school year, we will still have Crimson Drive streaming live through the end of June, coming up right here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network. That's a look at our Wickles Weekend Update, again brought to you by Wickles Pickles. And that's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR. We want to say a huge thank you to the guests that we had join us earlier in the show, Andrew Pinckney of Alabama Baseball, along with Nick Kelly of the Tuscaloosa News, as well as Tom Canterbury and Gray Robertson, giving us their thoughts on Crimson Tide softball. Thanks as well to our producer, Ethan Caravan, putting the show together, and thanks to all of you for watching. Now let's enjoy some Crimson Tide athletics coming up this weekend. Until next week, have a safe weekend coming up, and roll Tide.